Okay, good evening, everybody.
Evening.
Thank you for coming to this third in our series of Tehillim, the inside story. And as we've been trying to do each time, start with a somewhat inspiring story about Tehillim. This is another true story. This takes place in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, a number of years ago. The story is told about Rabbi Aryeh Levine. Rabbi Aryeh Levine was known as the Tzaddik of Jerusalem. He was a Tzaddik, he was a truly righteous person, but more than being righteous, he was a very caring person. In fact, there are many stories about him told about him going to visit people actually in prison during the war. He was risk his life to go and, when people weren't out in the streets, he was in the streets going to visit people and giving people chizuk, strength and encouragement. One of my favourite stories is told about him, which I tell to prospective grooms before they get married, is this story. Because it's a very good piece of advice for a husband and for a wife, I suppose, as well. But it obviously involves the husband. Him and his wife once went to the doctor. His wife had a problem with her leg, and they went to see the doctor. And they went into the doctor's surgery, into the doctor's room. What do they call it? A room, yeah. Surgery. Yeah. But the actual room, the doctor's consulting room.
Okay.
No? I'll call it consulting room. Whatever. It wasn't there in those days. It was a consulting room. He went into his and the doctor said to Rabbi Aryeh Levine, "How can I help you?" And he said, "My wife's leg hurts us." And he wasn't him misspeaking. That was him expressing the fact that if my wife's leg hurts, it hurts both of us. And I think that's a really good way of looking at things, right? But that's just an example of how sensitive he was and how caring he was and how much he felt other people's pain. And the story involves once a woman came to see him, very, very upset. She came in and he spoke to her. She explained that her husband is very, very ill. And she was almost inconsolable. And he tried to console her and explain to her, that whatever will happen will happen, and that he's there to help her, whatever will happen. And she said that she's been davening for him, and she's been crying, and she's just praying to Tehillim. And she said, well, continue doing that. Anyway, a little while later, she comes back to me, and unfortunately her husband, it was Nifta, had passed away. And this time she was completely inconsolable. And not only was she crying over her loss, but as she explained to the Rabbi Levine, she explained that for my loss I can be consoled. But what I can't be consoled over is the fact that I feel that all the tears and all the Tehillim that I said were wasted because my prayer wasn't answered. My husband wasn't cured as I asked God to cure him. Rabbi Levine said to her, you should know that when you go to that great Kiddush in the sky, meaning when you die, you'll see, God will show you that not one of your tears, not one of your words of Tehillim was wasted. There were incredibly harsh decrees and rulings made against the entire Jewish people that were reverted on account of the words of Tehillim that you said. So you should never think that your words were wasted. Yes, you didn't get the answer you were hoping for in relation to your own husband, but to know that all your tears and your prayers and your Tehillim were gathered together in a precious storehouse under God's throne itself, and the merit of those saved lots of other people as well. With that, she was comforted. Okay, with that, we'll move on to our next instalment. Please take and pass along. I hope I got enough.
I hope you told my son the bit about him feeling her pain.
Absolutely.
Does it apply in labour?
Yes, I think the bones in my hand still haven't recovered. So.
I'll ask him in a few weeks' time.
Right, please go.
So one more.
That's all I've got, I'm afraid. You can have my copy otherwise, but you'll have to give the share.
So we can share.
It's all right.
We can share.
Sorry. I was trying to save the planet. 3 pieces of paper at a time. Okay, so
Every little thing counts.
exactly. Okay, so what we'll try and do again is a bit of a structure we'll try and follow is to get a bit more of an insight into Tehillim in general, David HaMelech's role in authoring them, and then look at one particular chapter of Tehillim in a bit more depth. So let's start off. We see there's the midrash on Tehillim. There's a well-known midrash called, or a very famous midrash called the Shokatov. The Shokatov midrash tells us a few things about Tehillim. I just picked out a few. Firstly, it tells us in source number 1, David HaMelech's every limb praised the Holy One, blessed be He. He praised with his head, eyes, mouth, throat, limbs, etc. What do you think the midrash is trying to convey in those words?
He did it wholeheartedly.
Yeah, totally absorbed, wholehearted. Yeah. That it came with every fibre of his being. Yeah, that this wasn't some sort of like pastime. He he enjoyed train sets or something. Tehillim was this little thing he used to do in his man cave, right? This is something which was totally consumed him, was totally enveloped him. His very identity, every aspect of his existence was focused on composing and saying Tehillim. Okay, that's the first thing. And then we look at the source number 2. The Gemara in Pesachim tells us something very interesting. The sages taught in a brisa, which is a piece of Mishnaic material that wasn't actually included in the final cut of the Mishnah, that with regard to all the songs and praise that David recited in the book of Psalms, Rabbi Eliezer says, David said them about himself. They were the praises of an individual that were later transmitted to the community. Rabbi Yeshua says he originally said them about the community. He composed all the psalms of the people, including those he wrote about himself. And here we have a classic piece of Gemara, or classic piece of Jewish conversation, which involves machlokas, a dispute, a disagreement. Yes, one says he wrote them about himself. The other one say he wrote them for the whole community. How do we reconcile it? Well, I think actually Rabbi Yeshua's opinion is reconciling. He said, he originally wrote them about himself, but they applied also to the community as well, and you can take them both ways. The rabbi said, there are among those psalms some that are about the community, and there are the psalms that are some about himself. So again, that's the way of being what's known as machriya, compromising, right? Yes, some are about himself, some about the community. The rabbis clarify their opinion. The psalms that are stated in the singular form are about himself for obvious reasons, and those stated in the plural form are about the community, also for obvious reasons. Okay. So again, on the surface, that seems to make perfect sense. Again, what is the Gemara trying to convey here? What idea is it trying to convey? That whether you say they were written about himself or they were written about the community,
they apply to everyone.
Apply to everybody. Yeah.
Both as important.
Yeah. Sorry.
They're both as important.
Both as important, both to him and to us.
And us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's part of the community.
Right. Yeah. So he's writing about himself both as an individual and a part of the community. Yeah. Yeah. That for David HaMelech, there was no difference between whether he was writing about himself or for the community. They were equally as meaningful to him, whether he was writing about himself, a personal experience, or reflection on his own situation, or whether he was writing it on behalf of the community as well. It was if it was one and the same. I think that's what Gemara is trying to tell us. Which again is an interesting insight. Again, why? Again, we're trying to answer along the way the question of why Tehillim have had this enduring relevance and power and efficiency. And I think this is the Gemara is trying to allude to this, which is if they'd just been written about himself, then perhaps it's very limited in terms of their remit, in terms of their influence. If they were only written about the community, then some way he's detached from it slightly. But the fact that it's written about himself and the community is telling us that he's intrinsically linked to all of it, and it has enduring meaning not only for him but for us as well. That we can, and maybe another thing also, that we can sometimes tap into it. Sometimes we're saying Tehillim for ourselves. That's absolutely fine. Sometimes we're saying it on behalf of others, and sometimes we're saying it as a collective. So we're saying it either for people we know, or sometimes even people we don't know, right? And the fact that David HaMelech wrote it in that way means, again, it can be used in those different ways. Yeah.
I'm right in saying, if I remember from one of the early ones, that David started them when he started writing when he was much younger. So he would have had a different perspective on life.
Yeah, there's definitely a progression. Definitely a progression through there in terms of and reflecting different situations he found himself in as well. Yeah. Source number 3, the Zohar. So there's a bit of a Kabbalistic idea here. He said the songs and praises composed by David contain secrets of divine wisdom because they were all composed through divine inspiration. Remember, we saw last time, sometimes we saw the way it was written, it would say, sometimes it would say Mizmor David, sometimes it would say the David Mizmor, would depend on whether he had divine inspiration and then started to write, or he started to write and then had divine inspiration. But either way, they were composed through divine inspiration. Divine inspiration rested on David, and he composed songs of praise. That phrase, songs of praise, always doesn't feel. It feels like, right, yeah, doesn't it? Yeah, a bit weird. Yes, yes, Sunday evenings. Yes. Anyway, I think we coined it first. Okay.
I'm sure we did.
Yeah. And then source number 4, again back to the Midrash, the Shokatov. Said David before the Holy One, blessed is He, may it be your will that my songs and praises be uttered in synagogues and houses of study forever. Which I think is quite interesting.
It's interesting, isn't
That's
it?
really interesting, isn't it? Yeah. That part again, you could clearly tell that part of his intentions in writing them, again, even if they were written not on his own benefit or for benefit of the community or both, that definitely the intent underlying all of them was that they should have an enduring use in collective places. It doesn't mention individuals. Actually, interesting. He's saying in synagogues and in houses of study forever. It didn't mean it intended for individual use, but clearly definitely meant it for collective use, communal use. Yeah, which is really interesting.
Sorry, does this predict the time when there'll be no temple? Because he's saying in synagogues and houses of study.
Right, good point. Remember, when did David live? Did David live in times of the temple?
No,
He preceded the temple, right?
Yeah,
It wasn't built
but
by his son.
he knew it was going to be built.
Right.
And does he? I don't know. I'm just wondering.
Yeah. Well, just know that even in the times of the temple, there were synagogues. There were synagogues in places where people weren't close weren't close to the temple. Yeah, and there were definitely places of study, right? Before the temple.
Synagogues before the temple as well.
Yeah.
Maybe
They've called them.
They wouldn't have called them synagogues. Bate Knisiot, places of. In Judaism, we have 3 words for a shul. Like in anything with Judaism, we never buy retail, we always buy wholesale. So if you can have one word, why use one word? You use 3. So 3 words. Beit Knesset, a place of gathering. So basically, that's what synagogue actually means, from the Greek word synod, to gather together. A Beit Midrash, a place of learning. And that's why we call it in Yiddish a shul, again like a school. And Beit Tefillah, a place of prayer, house of prayer. So it has 3 functions. Yeah. The temple had a very distinct function, which was a place of avodah, the service by the kohanim, the korbanot, the sacrificial order, etc., and the levim obviously singing, etc. It didn't necessarily have the same function as the synagogue would, as a place of gathering. People gathered in the courtyards, but it wasn't like, I'll meet you at the synagogue. I meet you at the temple at, it's 9:15, or for Kiddush. I don't know Kiddush. Well, they took the meat home with them. Some of them, it depends which korban it was, but they did. Yes, it was only ever meat Kiddush. Yes, not sure what the vegetarians did in those days. We'll move on. Yes. So yes, he may have envisaged the times when they weren't, but also Bate Knisiot and Bate Tefillot, Bate Midrashot, places of learning. Again, that's very interesting. That we see a shul, the building, as a place that can host all 3 functions, both of gathering, learning, and prayer. Whereas it used to be that there were more distinct places. So you'd have the yeshivot, you'd have the Bate Midrashot, the places of learning, which were very distinct from the Bate Knisiot, the places of Beit Tefillah, the places where they used to pray. In fact, this talks in Halacha, the person, they're spending all time in the Beit Midrash, should they daven there as well? Or, for example, on Purim, there's the Halacha about if a person's learning somewhere, it's not established as a shul, it's not a place of prayer, should they hear the Megillah read there? Or should they go to a Beit Knesset, which is going to have a much larger crowd, and hear it there? The answer is that you actually should go when it comes to the Megillah, because the concept of Barav Am Hadras Melech, in the multitude of people, the king is exalted, meaning a far larger crowd. It's far more honor, respect to the king than is small gatherings. That's where you should hear the Megillah being read. So that you see that through history there have been these different buildings for different purposes. Yeah, we just seem to have brought them all together. So it's maybe as property prices went up, I suppose. Who knows? Okay. The final midrash, Ben, is source number 5 again from the Shokatov. It says in Psalm 20, "May Hashem answer you on the day of your distress." Yeah, this was said to David after 18 psalms. And here we've got an interesting note that Psalms 1 and 2 are actually one psalm. And I think we touched on that actually right at the beginning. I think that's the first one we looked at, yeah? That although when they were canonized into Psalm 1 and 2, and then obviously up to 150, the first 2 actually were originally composed as one. Don't ask me why they were split, but maybe there was a thematic break there.
Do we know when they were put into those 150 chapters?
So, that's a good question. I think, did we touch on it last time and I said no? But we could say the same times when the Tanakh was canonized, so around about the times of Ezra and Nehemiah, yeah, so towards the end of the prophetic era, yeah. And then, so why did I bring that source? What is that source telling us? The David HaMelech himself said in the psalm, may Hashem answer you on the day of your distress. Which again, I think is David HaMelech alluding to the fact that the psalms should be used when we are in distress. And that through the psalms we should be answered.
And Psalm 20 said quite specifically at certain times.
Yes, exactly, also, yeah.
It's interesting, I answer you on the day of your distress, me.
Right. Oh, very good. Yeah. So he's saying, again, he's talking about
the community.
Yeah, excellent.
Or he could be talking to one person.
Right, it could be, so as an individual, but not as himself, or as a collective. 100%, that's right. Good. Okay, so again, it gives us those few sources, gives a little bit more of an insight into some of the background to the Tehillim, and which allows us now to jump in. You could have guessed which one I was going to choose tonight, couldn't you? Yes, sorry. Okay, but I think it, particularly because we're saying it so frequently, it's really worth really delving into it in a bit more depth. Okay, so Psalm 130 happens. It appears to be obviously like the mate of Psalm 121. Yeah, familiar to us. So whereas Psalm 121, when we started Shir Ma'alot, and we saw what was interesting about that, here a more conventional form, Shir HaMa'alot, a song of ascents. Makim Karasicha Hashem. From the depths, I call to you, God. Hashem Shema B'Koli, Tiena Oznecha Kashivot L'Kol Tachanunai. God, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my plea for mercy. Im avonois tishmoika, Hashem mi'amod. And here's almost a rhetorical question. God, if you, if you keep account of all sins, then who can stand? Who will survive? Kimcha slicha leman tivarei. Because with you is the power of slicha, to forgive. Yeah, we're all familiar with the word slicha, right? Yeah, I was joking. It's the word you hear in Israel a lot, but you don't. Right? The word say sorry, yeah. Leman tivarei, that you may be held in awe. Kivisi Hashem kivsanam shi. I hope to Hashem. My soul hopes to Hashem. Livdaroho chalsi, and I wait His word. Now, Shila Hashem shomrim laboke. So we got a bit of a repetition here in both those verses. And my soul waits for Hashem. Za'igav Hashem like a watchman for the morning, Yeah. Yachel Yisrael Hashem. And here seems to be a bit of a directive. We'll see, according to some of the commentaries, here's a bit of a directive towards us, an instruction. Yachel Yisrael Hashem. Israel, hope or wait for God, or trust in God. Ki im Hashem chesed v'habeh im ofadu. Because with Hashem is kindness, and the great power, the great ability is with Him to redeem us. V'yivdes Yisrael mikol avanasav. It is He who will redeem the Jewish people or forgive the Jewish people for all of their iniquities. Okay, so words very familiar to us. Just having a cursory look at it, and I apologise because having to try and avoid having Seamus on these sheets, I've changed some of God's names on here. But if you look in the original, what do you notice immediately about this? What stands out to you about this psalm particularly? I'll show you. This comes down to our retail and wholesale question again.
Well, so there's repetition.
There's repetition, yeah.
God's name's mentioned quite a lot of times.
Yes, God's name is mentioned a lot of times, and if you look,
It's quite personal, isn't it? So, I mean, there is forgive Israel, but there's also, if you keep account of sins, it's almost like there's a personal plea in there as well.
yes,
So yes, it's Israel, but it's also, so it's community and self.
yeah, good point. It's a good point. Yeah, we'll see something about that as well, which is that, so it's, again, the Dov HaMelech is perhaps reflecting what he may be thinking, and what we may be thinking when we're saying this, because we're asking God, basically, help us. Right? We're calling out to you from the depths of our distress. Help us. Now, we should have a sense of Miani. Who am I? Right? How can I stand in front of God with all my iniquities and ask God to do X, Y, and Z for me and for us as a collective? That's perhaps what David HaMelech is reflecting here. And we'll see one of the commentators picks up on that. It's a great point. Okay. Anything else? So again, I apologise. If you'd seen it in, if I hold it, maybe I can show you. Upside down. Okay, it starts here. Okay, so Shia Malois, Mimama Kim Krasicha Hashem, Yud K Vav K, spelled that way. Next line. Again, I said I've taken it out of that.
Hashem's
Yeah.
It's spelled differently. Yeah, you see it. Yeah. So again, wholesale resale. We have lots of different names for God, right? But they're not just random, because each different name represents a different attribute, a different divine attribute characteristic. Again, that's a whole other discussion. What do we mean by that? But certain names will reflect a certain aspect of the way God relates to us, and that's significant in here as well. So we'll unpick that in a moment. Okay, so let's turn over. So let's pick up on the first thing. So Shia Malos, again, a standard opening, a song of ascents, and very contrasting to that is Mimamakim Krasich Hashem. So a song of ascents, from the depths I call out to you. Yeah. Says the Gemara, very interesting, there's a halachic principle we can learn out of this, from those words. What does it mean, from the depths I call out to you? We would think
You're
in
somewhere
a low place.
low place, you need to go up.
Oh, so you're saying, okay, so from a physical low place.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you
Or
look up to the
psychological.
heavens.
Psychological. You're looking up to the heavens. Yeah. Like we saw, remember, like we saw the last time, we said, what are the words? We said about, I look to the mountains. Yeah, where will the help come from? Yeah, so we're looking upwards. Yes, right, yeah.
Being humble.
Being humble, okay, so recognizing that we are Shafa Ruach, that we are humble, yeah, that we're low
We
down.
might be held in high esteem, but we ourselves should be humble.
Right, okay, brilliant, yeah. Yeah. So the Gemara actually learns, and this is brought down in Halakha, something from this. Why specifically does David Melech say, Mimama Kim Karasicha Hashem, that from the depths I call out to Hashem? Says the Gemara in source number 7, with regard to the halachot of prayer, Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Hanina, said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, a person should not stand in a high place and pray. Rather, he should stand in a low place and pray. As it stated, I call to you, God, from the depths. Our very psalm here. So actually, interestingly, codified into halacha is that a person should not stand on a high platform when they're praying. And then the Gemara goes on and says, like, you shouldn't stand on a bed or a chair or something like that. Now, actually, again, I don't know if anyone's familiar with a shul. So, for example, Yavna and Croxdale, actually, we seem to go against that, right? We use the bimmer, right? Yeah.
It's not very raised.
It's not very raised, but it is raised compared to the rest of the shul, right? Now, the bimmer actually, again, coming back to the reference to the temple, the bimmer actually, the reason why it's in the middle of the shul and it's raised up is because the shul, once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Chazal ruled that you cannot recreate a Beis HaMikdash in its entirety. So, for example, you cannot have a seven branch candelabra. You cannot have a 7-branch menorah. That's right. So, although that's why on Hanukkah we have an 8-branch one, because we're not allowed the 7-branch one. It just so happens that the miracle's 8 days. But what would happen if it had been 7 days? That's a whole other question, right? But we're not allowed to recreate those things that were in the temple and the architecture of the temple exactly, because otherwise we'd forget it was being destroyed. Part of the mitzvah of Zecher L'Churban, of remembering the destruction of the temple, which we're meant to do on a daily basis, is not recreating the temple in miniature in our shuls. So our shuls are redolent of the Beis HaMikdash. There are certain architectural cues to it. For example, the Aron HaKodesh is in the eastern wall. It's separated from the rest of the shul by using a curtain or some other barrier, just like the Holy of Holies was separated from the rest of the temple using a curtain. Right? So there's similar things like the bimah in the center of the shul raised up is to remind us of the mizbeach, the altar that was in the middle of the courtyard, in the middle of the temple courtyard, upon which was offered the korbanos, the offerings. And the Rambam tells us, in the times when we no longer have a temple, our prayers take the place of korbanos. Yeah, the avoda is the service we do now in the shul is an avoda shebalev, is service of the heart instead of service of sacrificial. Right, so that's why we have the raised problem. Now, we use that for leading the tefillot and also for Kriyat Torah for a practical reason, so everyone can see and hear it all the way around the shul, hopefully. But there are some shuls who are particular in the way they design it. Again, you often see them if you've ever been abroad, particularly in Svardish shuls, you may notice a difference in architecture. The prayers will be led. You've seen it? Maybe in Newcastle they ever have this? Come on, they must have in Newcastle.
Well, had various different sorts.
Yeah, go on.
Had the bimmer in the centre.
Yeah.
But all the services were led from
Right at the front.
Right at the front.
Right at the front. Right.
Except the shul mitzvah is the mitzvah where the bimmer was up
Right
by
at
the
the front.
Kodesh.
Right, yes.
Stan was like that.
Yeah, Stan was like that. My very first position was in Hammersmith. They also had it like that. Yeah.
It makes it very difficult to actually hear what's going on.
Oh, yes, you're right. It's very difficult to hear. But also, as a person leading the service, I remember times when I'd turn around and think, because it was so quiet, I think, has everyone just left? They crept out and left me. They hadn't ever, but that was always my way. But yes, but you'll see in certain shuls, the architecture is that they have a central bimmer for certain tefillot and for Kriyat Torah, for reading, for laning. But the tefillot will be led often at the right-hand side at the front of the shul, and some really... You ever go to the Ramah Shul in Poland, you'll see actually the floor slants downwards. Because they go very specifically on this point, from the depths I call out to you. So actually the way the person stands who leads the services is actually, in some shuls, will actually be lower than the rest of the shul.
The shul I grew up in, they've actually taken the bimmer away.
Oh.
In Edgware, Assurin.
All right. Due to lack of interest.
I think they're trying to get more interest.
Oh, I see.
That's what
Right.
I mean.
Right.
Space.
I don't remember last time I went in.
I think that was for people. I think it's making it more accessible for people who are less abled. I think.
Because they were quite old in there.
Right, because the steps to get up are probably quite difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't know.
Right. I think
Yeah,
it's-
there are
I think it's quite
practicalities.
confusing.
The younger
Yeah.
people
Built on
preferred
site.
not to have the raised bimmer in the middle.
Right. Yeah. So that's just sorry. That's just it's a side point, but it's interesting how from those words comes out halachot in terms of the way prayers should be offered. Again, particularly the person leading the prayers, as you said, that sense of humility to know that you are actually not above everybody else, but actually you are lower than everybody else, and in that role you are trying to offer. It comes from a very pure place like that. Okay, that's the first thing I want to show you. And apologies when the sources had English translations, I included them. When they didn't, I couldn't. So source number 8, the Ben Yehoyada, which is the Ben Ish Chai's commentary on this Gemara, says, Al Yamod Adam b'makom gavoa v'yitpalel el b'makom namuch. A person should not stand in a high place when they pray, rather in a low place. Nearly b'siyata d'shema. He says, it appears to me, with divine help, Ramzu Rabbi Simnud Zatzal lefi darakam b'loshon ha'maymer hazeh l'madun Musa. He said, it would appear to me that from this the rabbis learned out a piece of Musa. Musa is ethical teachings. That this is not... Although it has a halachic implication in terms of where you should stand when you're davening, there's also an ethical imperative from this as well, which is shadam sarach yishpalel b'peh uvelev yachad. When a person davens, when a person prays, their mouth and their heart should be one. Yeah, you shouldn't be thinking about the football when you're saying the Amidah. Okay, because the other way around, it wouldn't happen, would it? Yes. When you're talking about football, I'm sure you're not thinking about the Amidah.
Such is my interest in football, it might well happen.
Right, which way around? Oh, sorry, I'm not sure which way around.
he's not-
Oh, okay,
not
fine. Right, that was just an example. Okay, well, it could be anything. It could be knitting. Yes.
Not really for me.
Not even. I give up. Okay, but you understand the point, right?
Yeah, I get
The,
it.
the point is this, right? That a person's heart and mouth should be aligned when they're davening, right?
And like when you're at school and you're listening to them davening and counting the number of children on the back row. You're doing one thing, but your mouth's doing one thing and your brain's doing something.
Right, right. So that's the first point. And he says, "V'loi dai loi shishpalel b'peh shehu b'makom gavo barosh." He says, it's not enough. It's not enough that the fact that when we actually daven, when we're praying, the words are coming out of our mouth, which is the uppermost part of our body. Ela yamo b'makom namuch, but rather we should be standing in a low place, meaning b'leiv shu namuch lemata b'chatzi aguf, that it should come from the heart, which is sorry, and feel awkward now talking about anatomy here, obviously, but it's saying the heart which is lower than half of the body.
Lower than half.
Well, this was b'leiv shehu namuch lemata b'chatzi aguf. No, sorry, but lemata b'chatzi aguf. It's halfway down the body. Okay, around about halfway down the body. Depends how big your heart is, I suppose. Yeah.
How big your heart?
But we understand the difference, right? The mouth is up here, the heart is down here, right? There's a gap.
Not halfway.
Okay, but there's a gap. There's some gap, right?
Yeah,
Yes?
yeah.
Where the words are coming out is definitely higher from when they originate.
heart is.
Yes?
Yeah.
And yet, what I think we're trying to say is, Hashem, where should the words emanate from? From the heart, not just from the mouth. Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful idea. Yeah? That again, that what is he saying is, I'm calling out from Ma'amakim, I'm calling out from my heart, from the depths of me. It's coming from my essence, from my heart. It's not just lip service. Yeah, that point's well made. Okay. Let's now look at more of the actual wording of the chapter. Says the Ibn Ezra in source number 9. She'amalos ma'akim. Tal ma'akim. Says the Ibn Ezra. What is the reason why it's ma'akim from the depths? But avu, and here the question he's asking is ma'akim in the plural, from the depths. Why not just from the depth? From the depth of my heart. We say the depth of my heart, either one, but from the depth, right? I'm in distress. I'm in a deep place. I'm in a dark place. We don't say I'm in dark places. I'm in distress it's from one place, right? So why in the plural? So he says, Tamim ma'amakim, ba'avu hayos Yisrael, begalus, v'dalus, v'kalus, v'shiflus. The fact that, and here's the interesting translation, because, why does it say in the plural? Because we are calling out from multiple places of depth. We're calling out from galus, from exile, from dalus, from poverty, spiritual poverty, the kalus, and from a sense of being weak, the shiflus, and a sense of being downtrodden. So there are multiple reasons why we are mima'amakim. It's not just one. And those are the reasons why we're calling out. And then we say, so here I've had put it in the actual, so the second verse says, so Hashem Shema B'Koli. This time we're using a different terminology to the first term. So I'll explain. The name of Hashem, Yud K Vav K, yeah, as it's written here, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Here, at the end of the first verse. That name represents God's rachamim, God's mercy, where he relates to us mercifully, with his chesed, with the kindness. Amonai, this word, yeah, can also mean a judge, right? And therefore, when we use that term, we refer to God in terms of his midas hadin, his attribute of justice. So we're asking God to relate to us in two different ways. Okay? Firstly, out of mercy. Secondly, out of justice. Says the Ibn Ezra, Amonai, ba'avur ha'yosobim ma'akim, because on account of the fact that that we are in the depths, soek, and we're crying out, Shama b'koli, hear my voice. Hashem, Shema b'koli, I'm calling out to you from the depths. Have mercy on me. Hashem, Amonai, Shema b'koli, strictly speaking, God, you should be listening to me. Because I'm calling out to you from distress. I'm calling out from the depths. So we're calling on, we are saying, we are entitled to you at least to listen to our voice. Which is quite a bold thing to say. We'll see there's another interpretation of why we use this term here, because in fact we think we want to remain with that term of appealing to God's mercy rather than God's justice. But we're saying there's a sense of entitlement that, God, we know you are righteous and just. Therefore, if that's the case, then listen to us. Yeah, and remember, we're entitled to expect that of God, because that's what we believe God to be, a righteous God, a good God, right? And how do we know? Again, we may have talked about this last time, another time, that when we see injustice in this world, we're entitled, encouraged to question God, because we see Avraham Avinu did that himself. Yeah, the famous story, the famous episode of Sodom, when Hashem says, "Machaseh me Avraham," should I hide from Avraham what I'm about to do? And then the very next verse, Avraham says, "Hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat." Will the judge of all earth not do justice? Meaning there appears to be an injustice going on here. That you, God, your plan is to wipe out the righteous together with the wicked. How can that be fair? How can that be right? Well, everything I know about you has been shaken. And God says, okay, well, let's go through the process and we'll actually find out. Abraham realized, no, that God was doing what was right. But you see, we're invited to question that, because we have an expectation of God to act in a just way. And therefore, we're entitled here to say, look, I'm calling out to you from the depths of my heart. I think I'm entitled for you to listen to me. Okay? So that's what Ibn Ezra said there. Let's move on. Does that make sense? That's all good? Okay, source number 10, the Malbim. Shi'amalos. What is this Shi'amalos? Tefillah al salichos ha'avon. Says the Malbim, this is actually a prayer It says the whole thing is about asking God to forgive our transgressions. And therefore, from the depths are called out to Hashem. Ha'omek yoma al omek mimashi. That's what I mentioned earlier. Malbim is picking up on this fact. It says, starts off with Shehamalos, a song of ascent, that how do you raise yourself up from the depths of iniquity? By firstly calling out to God, by asking God to forgive us. So we're recognizing that the mamashi, that we are literally in the depths in the mire of iniquity, and we need God's help to get us out. And he goes on, for example, for like a poor person, like a weak person, like a person who's in exile and similar. Yeah, they need God's help. They need something that's going to elevate them out of this position. On to the third line. So not only is it talking about our physical position, but also our spiritual position, our nafshi, on our soul. What we've done through our transgression is what does the transgression cause? When we do something wrong, what does it cause? It sounds like a strange question, right?
Pain.
Anxiety.
Ourselves.
To ourselves, yes, okay.
And to Hashem.
And to Hashem, does it really pain Hashem? Hashem is all powerful. Does it matter Hashem whether we do mitzvah or not?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so this is a more fundamental question. Okay, God is all powerful, right? God is unchanging. It doesn't make any difference to God whether the Midrash says, it's not me just saying this. Okay, the Midrash says it makes no difference to God whether we shekel an animal here or here. Who does it make a difference to?
Animal.
Well, okay, the animal. Well, the result's going to be the same, but yeah, ultimately for us. And the Midrash says that the Torah was only given, the mitzvah only given, the tzarvis Adam, to refine us, to make us into better people. It will not affect, so let me give an analogy. Again, I don't know whether you've experienced, but sometimes, you say to your children, when you tell them to do their homework and work hard and be nice, right? It's not going to affect my life particularly, right? If they don't get the grades they want to get. I mean, I'll be upset for them, but it's not going to change the course of my career particularly. It will affect the course of their life, right? I'll be upset on their behalf. I'll be upset at the fact, right? If whether we keep mitzvah or not will not change the course of God's existence in any way, will it?
Changes us.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know I'm sort of throwing something upon you, but we have to understand this. It's really important to understand. It doesn't affect God in any way, other than a parent gets, of course, God is our Father. Yeah, other than that, a parent gets upset when they see their children not doing what they know is best for them. But materially, there's no difference in God. It doesn't change. It changes us, right?
Isn't there a thing like a mitzvah will lead to a mitzvah, a sin will lead to another sin? So if you start a sin, you're sort of on a slippery path down.
Yeah. But
So
how does that affect God?
it doesn't affect God, it affects you.
Yeah,
And the way that your life is, the trajectory of your life.
Yeah, and this is what he's saying here. So that's by my introduction to what the Malbim is trying to say here. Which is, what is the effect of transgression on us in terms of our relationship with God? Do we get closer to God or further away from God? Further away. Yes. When you do something that upsets somebody else, right, which damages your relationship with them, you create a distance, a barrier, right? Teshuvah, repentance, which is not a Jewish word, right? Return is we're closing the gap, right? And a loving God, a loving parent, always wants to see their child as close to them as possible, right? They're willing to forgive them, but the child has got to make that step, right? That's exactly what he's saying here. On the middle of that third line, V'gam yoma al omek nafshi. We're talking also about the depths that our soul is in. Mi shebelchatoi hitrachek me'Hashem hagavoa me'al gavohim. That there's a gap between us, right? We're physical beings and living in this physical world. God is infinite, living in the infinite realms, right? There's already a distance between us. But when we transgress, we make that distance even greater. God withdraws into the upper worlds and we descend further into the physical world. The more we are ensnared by the physical world, the distance we are from God. Yeah, I don't want to give away tomorrow's DHL, but very quickly, so we're talking about that, which is very interestingly in Egypt. The more the Egyptians, and the Torah says this, the more they afflicted them, the more they grew. which is counterintuitive, you think, right? The more someone's afflicted, the less they're going to grow. But the Maharal explains, which is the more a person physically is weakened, the stronger they are spiritually. It's like a candle. Yeah, again, it's a Mishle that a human being is like. I'm going to jump all over the place here, but this is all planned. It says that a human being is compared to a candle. Right? What's the comparison between a candle and a human being? There are two parts to a candle, right? You've got the wiccan wax and you've got the flame. Yeah, the two are just about connected to each other. Yes. How does the flame grow?
Using up the wax.
Right. The more the wax burns down, the more the flame grows. The more the physical aspect of the candle is diminished, the greater the spiritual aspect of the candle grows. And we know that the candle is spiritual, the flame is spiritual. Why? Because, and again, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of physics, what does the flame do that no other physical element can do? Rises. It's reaching upwards, isn't it? It defies gravity. Yeah. Why? Because there's some sort of spiritual element to it. It's in the physical world, but it's somehow disconnected. It's only tethered to the physical world through the attachment to the wick. But the more you burn down the wax, the greater the flame grows. Beautiful idea, right? Yeah, that's why the candles are so much part of the Jewish experience, right? Because it's really synonymous with what we're trying to do here. So that's what's saying here. So the other way around. The more we are engrossed in the physical aspects of our existence, the greater distance there is between us and our spiritual aspect, which is God. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I'm calling out to you, God, from the depths, the spiritual depths. The transgressions that I've done have caused me to be distanced from you, because you are the highest of the highest. We stand when we've rebelled against you and with the lowly spirit. Hagam gufo yamod b'hatzlacha uverom olam al yedei zeh. Similarly, in issues, in the physical aspects of our existence, also we hope you to save us and elevate us. Al yedei zeh yoma anochi karesim mishnei amakim shani ba. Therefore, we're calling out to God, mima amakim, plural, from the two aspects of depths that I'm in: physical depth and spiritual depth. Omek v'shifuf haguf, the depth and the lowliness of our body. Im omek v'shifuf hanefesh, and the depths and the lowliness of our soul. Okay, so that's the Malbim's understanding of why it's mima amakim. Does that make sense? Cool, let's move on. Source number 11, Mezuzah David, mima amakim, mitzoich omek hatsaros karasi l'cha Hashem. On account, so why we coming out from the depths? On account of the depth of the sorrows, right? That's firstly a Hebrew word and also a Yiddish word. The sorrows, right? The sorrows. I'm calling out from the sorrows, right? From the distress that I find myself in to you, God. Says the Alshich in source number 12. She'amalas memakim b'chosich omrim Yisrael shebegalus hechayil. The Jewish people, now we're saying on a collective basis, the Jewish people from the strength of the exile, hazeh, this exile, v'hichbid sarat hagalut amuk, lo bilvad hiskati alai hadin. The Alshich is saying that on account of the heaviness of the pain of the depth of this exile, from hiskati alai hadin, on the pure justice level, I can't expect you to do anything. Ki im gam yichastiv l'rachamim v'lo l'midas hadin. We touched on this before. Yeah, the name Hashem and the name Amonai. That here the Alshich is saying that first we are saying Shemalas mimamakim karasicha Hashem midas harachamim, the attribute of mercy. We're recognizing that actually we're undeserving of God answering us, of elevating us out of this depths of our exile. V'zeu karasich Hashem mitnahek imi b'rachamim. I'm calling out to you. I'm calling out, God, to your attribute of mercy. V'lo karasich Hashem din v'zu atachlis hatshuva. And I'm not calling out to you to the name of din, meaning Amonai. And this is the beginning of Teshuvah. what is the beginning of teshuvah? How do you begin the process of repairing the relationship that you've damaged between you and God, or you and another human being?
I've done it.
100%. Yeah. So firstly, acknowledging you've done wrong, you're in the wrong. Yeah, that's a very big step. Yeah.
Ask for forgiveness.
Asking for forgiveness. Yes. And appealing to the other person's, and here obviously God's as well, mercy, because by rights we may not be deserving of their forgiveness. By rights, we may not be deserving of God forgiving us. And again, those who've been listening to HL know pretty much everything that God gives us is not based on our merit; it's based on God's kindness to us. Yeah. Again, most children, what parents do for their children is beyond what the child necessarily deserves. Right smile, right laugh there. Okay, and that's all understood. Yeah. Source number 13, the Reishis Chochmah. Okay, v'chena tefillah sarech elat teshuva. So we know that prayer on its own is not enough. Yes, that this is a calling out from a depth. Right? This is an acknowledgement that we need to do something here to repair the relationship. Tefillah me'omek halev. It's prayer that comes from the depths of the heart. V'chein perish b'zohar. The Zohar also explains. Al posuk, another in this verse, our verse. Mimam makim karasich Hashem ama. Emasai is kadik bar nash mechuvia. And when a person acknowledges the truth of their obligation, b'shata ta'al b'hai teshuva k'takachazi, when they realize at the time when they're doing teshuva, and Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, the tav kamei malka Allah v'salid suluta ma'amuka deliba, that we call out to God, our King. We're praying from the depths of our heart. This is the words of the Zohar he's quoting. So what is Zohar saying here? That integral to the teshuva process is, again, the sincerity. This recognizing that what we have done has damaged the relationship we had. And only when we are genuinely sorry, admit what we've done wrong, recognize that we're at fault, only then can we start to repair the damage. And so again, it's just no point going through the process of teshuvah, saying the words, if you don't feel it in the heart. And that's the point that David HaMelech is making by these words, that it has to be Mimamakim Krasich Hashem. And then source number 14, Yonis Eibeshitz was one of the leaders of the generation, 18th century. He says, David HaMelech Pasach V'Amav, David HaMelech opened and said, words, Shemalas Mimamakim Krasich Hashem, V'hu Shem Havaya, and this was the name, the four-letter name of God, Yud Kei Vav Kei. And then, I don't know, so I was really careful here and I had this one, just seen it, just spotted it. Yeah, and the reason why it's been printed in here is put because Amonai, Shema B'Kolit, God's most Kashos called Amonai, V'Kamar Hari, says the Ari is already the Arizal, Ari HaKodesh. It said, Ki B'Yud Yemei Teshuvah, the 10 days of Teshuvah, Yeshlom Mizmor Zeh, Bein Yishtabach L'Yot Se'or. If you look in the Siddur, Jewish school, why would they have a Siddur? No, it's not fair, it's the history department. Anyway, if you look in the Siddur, you'll see that during the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we add in this chapter of Tehillim. So we see there's something really powerful about Teshuvah that is linked to this chapter. And we add it in to the morning service every single day. In the middle of the third line, he says the reason is that it's contained within the secrets of the Torah, explaining for us to understand. When God relates the Jewish people with his chesed, his kindness, who karov lanu k'tei shechasadim hamagbiim aleinu may also yosu karovim. When God, we are appealing to God's mercy. We're asking God, when you come to judge us as you do on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, do so from a position of your kindness, not from a position of your justice, because we know that we probably wouldn't be able to stand in front of God and be found meritorious in judgment if God will look at it on the strict justice level. Right? Justice has to be tempered with mercy, and that's what we're asking for here. Let's just summarize this really quickly. All right, so he's talking about this idea of that we should benefit in some way from the divine light. That's why this idea, it's been said that we add it in between Yishtabach and the bracha of Yotzei Or, that God is the one who forms light. The idea of light being, I think we've talked about this before, the idea of light being the goodness that God shines upon us. We talk about, shine your light, shine your face upon us. It's all about God's goodness and his kindness towards us. And he goes, again, it's a Kabbalistic idea that Ari is bringing down, which is that it should be sufficient for us, but not too much. Right? That's the balance between how much kindness God shows to us in terms of the amount of light he shows to us is that, you can only look at, you can't, when the light becomes too bright, you can't look at it. Right? Again, only God in his infinite wisdom knows the correct amount of kindness that we are deserving of and that is right for us. And again, that's an act of both justice and kindness, righteousness, right? To balance those two things. And that's particularly what we're asking for here. Okay, let's turn over a few more sources. Don't be scared by the huge announcements of it. Okay, we're going to move on a little bit. So that was basically on the first verse, remember? Yeah, we're not going to do every other verse. We're going to pick one more verse, I think it is. So we say, Kivisi Hashem, Kivsan Nafshi. Yeah? Kivisi. Yeah? Which we translate as I put my confidence in Hashem. Yes? I hope to Hashem. Yeah? Kavei el Hashem. Chazak yom yisrael v'kavei el Hashem. Yeah? It's the same shorish as the word tikva, hope. I hope to Hashem. I anticipate. I put my trust and faith in God. Okay? Kvisi Hashem, says the Malbim, yesh hebdel ben tikva uven yachul. Here again, there are two words that we use for trusting in God. We've got kvisi, and we've got, in the last verse is, Yachol Yisrael el Hashem, yes? Yachel Yisrael el Hashem, ki maches al Hashem, this is the penultimate verse, apologies. Yeah? Yachel Hashem, await Jewish, Yachel Yisrael el Hashem. Israel, await God, meaning anticipate God's salvation. So says the Malbim, what's the difference between the word kivisi, trust, wait, hope in God, and yachol, and await God? It says, Sibos hatikvahi benefesh hamakaver, that the cause of the hope is based on the soul of the one who's hoping. Shagem shelo hutach bebiru aladava, that can come. Tikva, hope, is something what we can have both individually and collectively at times when we're not certain what the outcome is going to be. We hope the outcome is going to be positive. We're not certain. That's absolutely fine. That's not a contradiction. Right? You can hope something's going to happen, even if you don't know it's going to happen. You don't know for certain it's going to happen. That's the nature of hope, right? Navshi tikva elav, my soul hopes to Hashem. Whereas awaiting Yachol Yisrael el Hashem, awaiting God, comes from a place of confidence. When you know, because you know what God is like, what will happen. We are confident that God will answer us. We are confident that God will elevate us from the depths because God has got form, so to speak. Yes, because He's done it before. Yes, that is why again. So no spoiler alerts. I'm allowed to mention the P word now, aren't I? Yes,
Yes,
I am allowed. I'm afraid. Yeah, we're well within.
Purim's gone.
Yes, we're well within. So Pesach. Why do we constantly refer to Pesach all throughout the year, not just at Pesach time? Why do we constantly refer? What I mean is that why do we constantly refer to Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt? Yeah, we talk about it on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and a yearly basis. Why? Because again, Maral says because it's the foundation of our faith. In God, when God's the first of the 10 Commandments, and I am Hashem, your God, who took you out of Egypt. One second, aren't you the God who created the world? Why not? It's God's CV here, right? Why not mention your biggest achievement? I created the world.
Because they were there.
Oh, right. Meaning we have personal experience. We know we weren't at the creation. We don't know. Yeah, God, of course you created. We didn't see it. We didn't witness it. We didn't experience it. But we all were there. All the souls were there at the Exodus from Egypt. Yeah, or at least our ancestors were there. I remember someone once telling me, he once went on a holiday to Egypt. They went on a boat cruise along the Nile, and the tour guide was obviously giving the spiel about, didn't they, look out the boat this way, that way, and they said, has anybody been to Egypt before? And he put up his hand and he said, my ancestors were here a few thousand years ago. Apparently his wife was mortified, but just brilliant, yeah. We were there, right? We were been, yeah.
Imagine someone who do something similar.
Can you imagine? No. We've got the T-shirt, we saw the postcard, right? Yeah, we were there. That's why. Yeah. Our emunah in God, our belief in God, is not based on the fact that, yes, we know He created the world, because we can talk about how you prove creation of the world another time, but we believe in God, meaning we believe God will redeem us from current problems because He's done it before. And that's really powerful. Yeah? And that's the difference between, we start off by saying, Kvisi Hashem Kisanashi, that I have hope, even though I'm unsure. Because why am I unsure? Because I might not be worthy. Yeah, remember, we're appealing to God's mercy to answer us, even though we're not worthy. But Yachel Yisrael El Hashem, but the Jewish people, as a collective, can know with certainty that God will answer them because He's done it before. And that's really powerful. And again, we haven't mentioned it as much as last time, but this really comes to speak to in terms of why particularly we use Psalm 130 together with 121, because it is a great strength to us to know, to remind ourselves that, yeah, we're asking God to help us now because and we know He's done it before. Okay. Source number 16. I will summarize it. Even the bits that are underlined that I wanted to look at directly, I'll summarize. Kivisi Hashem, Kivisi Nafshi, V'liv Chalsi. So it says, Hashem, I trust in you, I put hope in you, my soul hopes in you, and I await your words. Yadua, he says, let me summarize it. He says, we know that the Jewish people are distinct from all other nations in the world. Okay? That we are, there's verses in Devarim, Ki chelek Hashem imoy. We have a part of God within us. We are a godly people. Okay? And that means we live on an elevated level, like royalty. We are B'nai Melech. We are properly Jewish princes and princesses. Yeah. Now, with that elevated status comes responsibility. You cannot behave in the same way as other people do. There are certain expectations upon us. Yeah. Come with status comes responsibility. Yeah. So the Rabbeinu Bach here asked the question, knowing that, now we have to ask the question, if we are so dear to God and we're so close to God, why is it that we are perhaps the most persecuted and oppressed people throughout history? Good question, right? Really good question. And his answer is fascinating. He says, because of our status. Other nations who displease God, He has no connection with them. They're not mishpacha. Right? He's not been through with them what He's been through with us. And therefore, they upset Him, He wipes them out. And there are plenty of nations who've come and gone, shone very brightly, and fizzled away and disappeared, right? The Jewish people, because we are God's people, He cannot do that to us. Even if we're deserving of it, He cannot do that to us. And in fact, we know, again, part of the Exodus story is when the Jewish people complained and rebelled against God, God says, that's it, I've had enough, I can't take it anymore. Which means you can't do that, you can't. Because what will the Egyptians say, what will the other nations say? Oh, God was strong enough to take them out of Egypt, but He wasn't strong enough to take them into Israel. You can't. You've got to stick with them through thick and thin. Yeah. So what happens instead? When we do things which cause that distance between us, which put us into that pit of mimamakim, that distance from God and that barrier between us, we're sent into exile and we're oppressed. That's partly our own doing, but partly natural cause and effect. Yeah, you put your hand in the fire, you get burnt. You're not being punished. That's the natural consequence. Similarly, when we do things which displease God, when we do things which distance us from God, we no longer enjoy divine protection as much as we had previously. And therefore, we are subject to the whims of the nations amongst whom we live or are scattered to. And that's basically what happens, because God can't destroy us. So in effect, it's God's mercy that we are persecuted, because the alternative is we're destroyed. I think it's a genius way of looking at things, right? It's how do you flip, that's like a spin doctor could do, right? How do you flip the story, say, oh, this is a great thing, right? But compared to the options, it is a great thing, right?
What about the idea that the more, when we're too comfortable, people turn away?
Yeah, same thing. Yeah,
Look at what's happened now. The number of people who come to the vigil, for example, who you never see in shul. Right?
More people coming to shul
And
and
more
doing
people-
other things.
And more people coming to shul, more people doing other things,
Yeah.
more people standing up, more people.
Right. But that's why the Jewish people are compared to an olive, right? When you squeeze ours, you release,
Yeah.
the liquid gold, right? Right. Moshe Rabbeinu, he prophesied it, right? In Devarim it says, the time will come, you'll be settled in the land, you'll be comfortable.
Phew.
And then you'll see Kochi V'Otzim Yadi, then we'll be successful, and then we'll start saying, it's all down to me, right? God's got nothing to do with it, right? It's my own success that's brought this. And he's right, we start rebelling, we start ignoring God, we don't need God anymore. And then we're susceptible. That's exactly what happens. And he goes on and says, that's what has happened. If you I'm just trying to find it very quickly in the final part of that, where it's underlined. Let's just go to that final 3 lines. So the whole purpose of the exile and the oppression is that we wake up and we realize from the terrible situation we're in, what do we need to do? Where is our only hope going to come from? From God. And therefore the whole process that we've talked about of teshuvah, of returning to God, of calling out to Him, of listening to the prophets, of hearing what David Melech is saying to us is that our only hope is in God. Yeah. And that, I think, is a really beautiful and powerful understanding for us, right? That's why we're saying this, right? To remind ourselves that we cannot rely on anybody or anything else other than God. And any thought of that is a fallacy. And therefore we say these words partly, that's full circle, again, beautifully planned, I know, partly as a cry out to God, that through the merit of the words we're saying, that God should have mercy upon us, but perhaps equally, if not more importantly, to remind ourselves. Because that's the very source of it. And then finally, the source is 1780, very quickly. Jewish people, you have to believe in God. You have to hope to God. Because He's great in His redemption. What does that mean? Because many, many times, as we mentioned, what does it mean He's great in His redemption? The number of times He's redeemed us is numerous. And that is a source of great hope to know that. And as Duck says something, if we ask ourselves, how am I going to be redeemed? And I'm full of iniquity, I'm full of transgression, therefore I'm not deserving of it. God will forgive you. That's the last verse of the thing. God will forgive you. Yeah, you make that first step. Yeah, you acknowledge what you've done wrong. You do it from the depth of your heart. You start repairing that relationship. You understand that our only hope is in God. Then God will forgive you for all your transgressions. You've got nothing to worry about because you've made that effort. You've acknowledged the damage you've caused, and that's the first step back. Leave it there.
Thank you.
We were going to do the